Good evening. Welcome to the Warrant Committee. Karen, could we call the roll, please?
Excuse me, yes. We have Tom Caldwell, Lori Connolly, Jay Fundling, Julie Joyce is on Zoom, Andrew Coe, Macy Lee, Peter Munn, Brian McGuire, and on Zoom we have
Thank you.
Okay. All set to go? Okay, so Karen, we just called the roll. Welcome everybody to the Warrant Committee. So as indicated on Monday night, tonight we have Town Administrator Nick Milano and Amy Dexter here to explain the Select Board decision last evening concerning the override, the budget in general, and the articles for the upcoming annual town meeting in May. So that being said, I ask Mr. Milano if you'd like to come up first, or Amy if you'd like to come. Okay, that's fine. Thank you both for being here very much. Thank you.
Good evening again. Thank you
evening.
for your continued work. Welcome back. Well, I guess I'm back. You feel like you're always here, I'm sure, at this point. So I appreciate the opportunity to provide an update. What I'll do is I'll just talk about, in terms of town meeting, what the Select Board has done with some warrant articles. I might be a good news, bad news deliverer for those who haven't seen what the board talked about last night. So hence the town meeting with a plural on there. So good news is the warrant for the annual town meeting is pretty limited to budget articles. So the annual recurring budget articles that we take up annually, from the departmental appropriations to appropriations for employee benefits and other accounts, the capital budget, Community Preservation Act, and all those articles that are recurring annual articles are on the warrant. In addition, the Select Board has voted to put a few others. Two of them are budget related. The first is a warrant article to establish a new operating budget stabilization fund and to appropriate funding into that stabilization fund. So stabilization funds can be established by a majority vote of the town meeting. Once they are established, they require 2/3 approval from town meeting to withdraw funds. So it's a two-step process: establish and then a 2/3 vote to take money out. Excuse me. The other article related to the budget that the Select Board has added is an article to create a new special education stabilization fund. This is a slightly different form of a stabilization fund. Under general laws, towns can establish these stabilization funds with a vote of town meeting to establish it and to appropriate monies into it. Once it is established, however, withdrawals from that fund are subject to the approval of the school committee and the Select Board. So it doesn't go back to town meeting for withdrawal. Once it is established, the authority rests with the school committee and the Select Board. Both bodies have to vote to support use of that fund. And it stipulates within the language the kind of costs that are eligible to be paid from it, which in this case is special education costs, transportation costs. And I will provide the language for those. I have not distributed that yet, but I'll get those shared tomorrow for everybody to look at. The other other three, so two zoning bylaw amendments that this committee has looked at. One related to site plan review, the other related to accessory dwelling units. The planning board did vote to send those back to town meeting. at their meeting last week. So they have made some updates to those articles, but those have been added to the warrant as well. Not that there's been enough curveballs on the ADUs, but the state has released its kind of model bylaw and a guide on accessory dwelling units zoning zoning bylaws, I guess. I'm repeating myself there, but so we had been waiting for that, and we're hoping to get that well ahead of the February town meeting. It didn't come out. I think it came out, it was dated yesterday, March 11th. So that's up on the mass.gov/ADU website. I don't know what, if anything, the planning board may do with that, but I just wanted to flag that as a potential factor here. And then lastly, the select board did put back on the general bylaw amendment related to light trespass. The dark sky protection one, which was the lengthier of the two, has been taken off the table. So the focus is on that. We don't have final language on that one, and our next meeting of the select board is tentatively next week, but definitely March 25th. So I have more to follow on that one, but those are, as it stands, the warrant articles for the annual town meeting, with the warrant going to the printer in the first week of April. So that's good news, I guess, maybe.
It's very good news, Mr. Town Administrator. I'd like to mention, if I can interrupt you in your presentation, our Town Administrator spoke very highly of the Warrant Committee at the Select Board meeting last night and asked, they of course want to get a lot of business done, but Nick had mentioned that to give the Warrant Committee a break.
Give them a break and then make them come back for June. So the other discussion item was the potential for a special town meeting in June. The origination, where this came from originally, is through the planning board and their efforts to bring forward a zoning bylaw related to the MBTA Communities Act. What that will look like is still to be determined, but they had requested, or they had discussed at their last meeting, requesting that the select board identify a special town meeting for June to take up MBTA Communities Act zoning as they continue to work on efforts related to that. There's a July 14th deadline under the current emergency regulations that have been established by the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities related to MBTA Communities Act. So the planning board's intention is to meet that deadline with some potential zoning. So the select board last night discussed its preferred date as being June 9th. I have reached out to folks in town about logistically whether that date is available, so we're working through that. I've reached out to the planning board to inform them of the preference of June 9th with a backup of June 16th. And so we're just waiting to collect that feedback, and then the select board would look to finalize that date at its next meeting, its next regular meeting, which will be March 25th. So 3 articles from the planning board that we're aware of. The first one is a similar housekeeping type update that we did with the zoning map at the February town meeting. The flood maps and the floodplains that are addressed in the zoning act for Milton are, they're all being updated, or they've all been updated by the federal government. So our bylaw references certain maps that need to be updated to reflect the change. So it just goes through in certain places to update definitions where necessary and to identify the changes in the maps. East Milton Overlay District zoning, that was discussed at a public forum last night. The planning board had let that go to a town meeting. I understand that's still the case, but if there's any change on that, we'll let you know. MBTA communities that I mentioned. We haven't finalized these last 3, but there is a new state law related to veterans' property tax exemptions that we're looking at as potential to consider adopting locally. We talked briefly about the signalization project at Adams and Squantum Street at one of my previous meetings, and then alcohol on town land. Now that the alcohol on town buildings has been approved, the select board's interested in continuing that conversation about town land. That hasn't gone anywhere yet. So the zoning bylaws are more definite. The next 3 are more news to come on those, and hopefully by the resolution of our March 25th meeting. So that's the town meetings schedule.
Okay. The override number was set, right?
Yes, and I can turn to that if,
Well, yeah, I'm sorry.
No.
Anybody have any questions? Okay.
So I have some slides that we've seen before. So this is, we've talked about the budget and where that stands. So this is just a refresh of the level service budget. And from 25 to 26, we're up about 11.9 in expenses, and our revenues have grown by about 2.4 million. That leaves that $9.5 million hole that we've been working on with the select board. So last night, the select board voted to submit a ballot question to the town clerk for inclusion on the annual town election. That would read, excuse me, let me go to the question first. This is subject to final edits by town council, so just take that. But generally, the idea is, shall the town of Milton be allowed to assess an additional $8,800,000 in real estate and personal property taxes for the purpose of funding the operating budgets of the town and public schools, and an additional $700,000 in real estate and personal property taxes for the purpose of funding an operating budget stabilization fund for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2025. So that is, in draft form, the question that would be on the ballot, subject to town council's edits. The structure of that article is to do two things. So we have the $9.5 million deficit, but we've talked a lot about how can this be sustainable. And where I was previously in talking about was, using free cash to do that. And the limits on free cash are that it's non-recurring. And speaking with folks in the intervening time period, there was a lot of interest in trying to get to a place where there would be a recurring fund or a recurring amount of money to enable this altogether. The amount set aside for operating budgets would be the 8.8 million, and then set into this special operating budget stabilization fund would be $700,000. So since it's part of an override, that now is recurring, and it can grow 2.5% a year, as with the tax levy. There's a few pieces to that we can get into in more detail if necessary, but that's $700,000 is permanent part of the tax levy and can be increased at 2.5% a year. And it would go into that operating budget stabilization fund each year. In addition, the proposal is to move $2 million into the operating budget stabilization fund, so it'll be capitalized in this first year with $2 million in free cash, the $700,000 from the override. Now, we can't guarantee that we'll be able to put additional free cash into it in future years, but what is guaranteed is that $700,000 can grow at 2.5% for that. Why the $700,000? So that came from looking at some of the budget asks. In the school department was looking for additional funding to rely less on circuit breaker so that they can build that reserve back up over the next couple of years. So my perspective was, rather than have that be done through the tax levy and through the override, we can put that amount of money into a stabilization fund available for all town and school departments and for shared costs. So it's that $700,000 is now available to the entire town budget. In addition, because we're in a good position on free cash, we can set aside money to support the schools for special education costs that may be above what's anticipated for fiscal year 26 and beyond. So, in exchange for taking $700,000 from the school budget, proposing to capitalize a sped stabilization fund under the control of the school committee and the select board with $1 million in free cash. So, in theory, in fiscal 26, it should have no impact on the budget, but it is not a recurring source that would be in the school budget. And our projection in terms of sustainability, and I'll get into a little bit on our assumptions on that, is we'll be back for an override in a few fiscal years, but we'll have some resources that will facilitate getting there if certain assumptions prove out to be true. So I know that's kind of a lot. I'll happy to talk about what those assumptions were, but maybe stop there if there are questions on how this is being structured, or any questions about that piece of it.
Jay?
I'd like to ask about the Special Education Stabilization Fund. Will there be, how strict or how not strict will be the policy or the rules, I guess policy, as to when and how much that would be used?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where some of the conversation has to continue between school committee and select board. There are limits within how the law, what the law requires in terms of what are eligible expenses to be paid out of them.
Okay, I mean, not knowing what those limits are, if they're special education and if that's $4 million a year, and I can imagine a situation where the school committee and the select board could decide any number they want to fill a school budget, and maybe that's okay. Or I can imagine another one where they decide now, if special education goes up by more than X percent, we will take those dollars out and have a very strict pre-written rule. So I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, so as currently drafted, that information is left for the select board and school committee to determine and develop policies around. There could be certainly language written into the stabilization fund that limits how much could be withdrawn from it in a given year. There are ways to structure it. One way would be to put it into the authorization. Another way would be to, defer to the select board and school committee to come up with a policy and procedure on that. We haven't got there yet. And if it's of an interest that, folks would want to see prior to the town meeting and prior to voting on it, that's something we can take back and try to work on. But where some of these pieces came together, and we're still working on some of the more finer details.
Yeah, in my personal opinion, it's fine if we don't have a policy today. I'd rather see a policy in the next month or two as opposed to 11 months from now, we're putting together the budget and, hey, let's make a policy. And by coincidence, the policy gives us the exact amount we need to fill our budget hole. I mean, that's actually not the end of the world if they just use whatever to fill their budget. I just want to know what the plan is.
Yep, no, understood. That's good feedback.
Allison had a question.
Yeah, so to Jay's point, we used free cash last year for positions, and is primarily why we are in a deficit. I'm just as March last year, same time, I had asked you, we were at a $4.5 million deficit with the ARPA, and I'm just trying to understand how we're not going to be in a we're using free cash to fund positions. And to Jay's point too, with this sped edition of stabilization, we can easily start to live on this free cash again as we continue to build the stabilization, because we're going to be operating knowing that we have this kind of cushion for positions, and that's why we were in this situation this year. I'm just trying to understand how budgetarily we're spending more than we're bringing in. And I don't know how we can continue without making assessments on positions or, so that we cannot be in the red operating. We're at a deficit each year, but we're not making any changes, and we're not bringing in more, from what I'm understanding, to fill that gap. So I don't know how we can continue to live on this free cash as our backup. When years ago, when I first started, we were only getting like 500,000 in free cash, and now we're in millions. And I know you don't know what's going to happen next year, but if we continue on this cycle, we won't be able to last more than a couple of years. And I don't know how even if that. So when we throw out numbers like 2030, I'm just concerned about doing that.
Yes, that is the issue with free cash. What we're doing now is saying we have a good amount and let's put it away to draw down over the next couple of years. We're not building into our forecast in 27, 28, 29 additional use of free cash. We're saying right now there's 3 million. We're going to put 2 million over here and 1 million over here. And that's really it for a one-time recurring expense. And we do forecast that eventually this is not sustainable. I wish I could sit here and guarantee you that it'll be sustainable for even as long as we say, but those are just based on assumptions that if proven incorrect, it falls out of balance sooner. But what is recurring is the $700,000 is an additional fund that is recurring annually. The $8.8 million is a permanent increase that is then, subject to Prop 2.5 rules, where it can go up by 2.5%, just like the rest of the tax levy. So there is a lot of recurring money built into this override, and we're, supporting that, supplementing it by the use of some one-time monies to be drawn down over the course of the next several years, not to be drawn down immediately necessarily. So it's trying to use both recurring and non-recurring revenues to map out a plan that hopefully with minimal budget increases over the next couple of years, that we're able to avoid some of the constant deficits for at least a couple of years here.
May I follow up? So the only question that I have is that, for taxpayers, we should be using this money for one-time needs, and we're building it into our stabilization where we should be doing that in our budget. And so, like, for example, if, we did the fourth floor Cunningham, all the taxpayers have to pay for that as a debt exclusion, where we could have used one-time free cash, where it would benefit all taxpayers for not having to pay for that debt exclusion. I'm just concerned and I understand it's great to build the stabilization and we put a little bit of money away, and that's generally how we did it a couple of years ago, if we had free cash. But my thing is that we've allowed us to use it in the last couple of years to fund positions that we haven't budgeted for, and now we're using it again to create a stabilization, but those could be used for positions again, and we're going to be kind of creating the same cycle of, if they create, let's say, special ed positions, to that point that Jay, kind of what we're not creating, a structure of how it's being used. We could get into this hole again where we use that free cash to create these special ed positions, and then we don't put them in our budget, and we're in the same boat where we're in a deficit. And yes, I understand creating that stabilization, but it doesn't mean that they're going to be used for one-time funds. So that's the only concern I have, that I think needs to be looked at on the board, the committee's point. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you, Allison. Liz?
So of this 3 million, how much of a percentage of that is what we have in free cash overall?
So this would bring the free cash balance to zero with the other uses of free cash anticipated, which is $878,000 for capital, $155,000 and change, that's opioid settlement monies that can only be used on those purposes, and then a separate contribution of $500,000 into the general stabilization fund to be, truly put away for stabilization purposes. So that we have about $4.5 million that's been certified as free cash as of at the end of June 30, 2024.
Any questions? No? Jeff?
Hopefully this is an easy one. I don't tend to ask you easy questions, but here's one. We have a few stabilization funds now, mostly one stabilization fund. And the impression is if we ever pull money out of that and it's not a dire emergency, Wall Street is going to hit us with a big stick. So are we going to convey to Wall Street, there's this stabilization fund, which is like Fort Knox, but then there's also this stabilization fund, which we expect money to go in and out of every year, and don't hit us with our credit rating because of that. Are we going to convey that somehow?
Yes, that usually is a topic of conversation at ratings calls is the town's use of stabilization funds and the purpose for them. So that's trying to be explicit that the purpose of these is to be used to support the budget rather than meant to be as reserves. They're not meant to be, reserves in huge numbers that we only use in an emergency. They're meant to be relied upon to support the budgets.
Thank you.
So would the credit rating, would they look upon this, I assume it's very favorably?
Yeah, I think.
Or does it cut both? Does it cut both ways?
No, I agree. I think especially because it'll make the town's stabilization funds appear to be much larger, in the near term.
Yes.
So it'll be our job to educate them that if they start to see the fund balance, decline, it's planned. And I think they're always looking for planned uses, documentation supporting why things are being done rather than just kind of, no policy or practice behind the use of some of these kinds of funds.
I'm sorry for my ignorance about this, but when is that reporting done? Is that twice per fiscal year, if you know, or is it per
Generally,
quarter?
it's before we issue. So
Yeah.
generally, in our borrowing schedule has been in August, so we typically have a ratings call in August,
Okay.
July-August timeframe annually.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Peter?
And what is our rating currently?
We are a AAA community currently. So that's the highest.
Can you remind us, where does the majority of the free cash come from? Generally, like not.
So it's generally when we collect revenues that are higher than we projected in the budget, that would add to free cash, or when we spend less than is appropriated. So for example, the police department last year had a significant turnback, we call it. So they spent less than was appropriated. That was mainly because they had several vacancies that they had difficulty getting the new officers into the police academy, so those positions were vacant for a while. So at the end of the year, we try to be fiscally responsible and not just spend that. So if you spend less, it adds to free cash. If you collect more than anticipated, it adds to free cash. And one of the big factors last year was the investment income. Because the rates were so high, the new treasurer, Joanna, is doing a fabulous job with, managing the money. And she brought in a lot more investment income than we had projected in the budget.
Just to further clarify, by we say investment income, but it's earnings on interest rates. It's not.
Yeah.
like
So that'll come down this year,
Yeah.
most likely.
Exactly, right. And I think to that point, in terms of fiscal '25, where some of our budgets, we're turning back good monies at the end of fiscal '24, we're not going to see that as much. This winter was significantly more expensive than last winter, so that we're allowed to deficit spend against snow and ice operations. So there are more budgetary pressures this fiscal year than they were last year, so I wouldn't expect that level of free cash, just looking at how 25 is going and tracking, we're spending, closer to our appropriation than we did in 24 for a number of reasons.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. So my understanding, I'm going to compliment you. So my understanding is that we've been very conservative in some of the budgeting that we've been doing. You all. So I think the fact that we have this free cash is sort of a little bit because some of these positions are not filled and there's vacancies, but I also think it's in large part due to the conservative nature of how you're budgeting out. Because every time we talk, you're saying we've estimated very conservatively. So I guess for me, I'm trying to understand. So for these stabilization funds, I just feel like maybe that's another sort of conservative measure. Do you agree? To kind of avoid some of the problems that we could see otherwise. So to have money in the coffers so that as I was talking about on Monday, my concerns that special education costs increase because the law is constantly changing and we have to comply with it, and that's great, and those are valued members of our community and everything. And so we know that it's going to continue to increase. So that's kind of the conservative budgeting to make sure that we have the appropriate money sort of set aside. So I look at it kind of like a different way. Like maybe it's just conservative budgeting by the town to try to make sure that as that continues to march along, we do have the money because we are conservatively budgeting for, you know, the positions and everything. And so I think that you sort of factor in less of a return on whatever you said, like earnings on investment, like than we might normally see, like a little bit less income generated, like from property that we whatever, property tax and things like that, so that then we will have free cash, and then we're sort of applying that, sort of like you said, we're not just spending it on whatever, but we're kind of applying it to a stabilization fund, sort of how I look at it.
Yeah, that's the intent, and hopefully, you know, based on some of the assumptions we're making, that is borne out. We can't make any promises
Sure.
that it will be the case. We're going to do the best we can to manage it, and I think that's where, you know, when we're building our, you know, revenue forecasts, you know, last year we had, at fiscal 24, I think our local receipts revenue was about 12.3 million. You know, this year in the budget, we're estimating 10.2 million because 1.6 million of that revenue was interest income. So we can't guarantee that that's going to be there. So it's conservative. We know there's some, you know, level that will be. So, you know, I think there is occasionally pressure to, you know, make those forecasts rosier, but we try to keep them where they're at because you never know what's going to happen. The economy 4 weeks ago was one thing, and now it's a little bit different. Or 5 weeks ago, so you know, things can change on it, you know, and really quickly. And then that, you know, leads. I appreciate feedback, but I wasn't alone in working on this. A lot of pressure, you know, a lot of work behind the scenes to try to come up with some ideas that'll work, that'll, you know, that are within kind of the expectations of where we've been talking about all along, to try to land on a consensus number for the select board.
This proposed use of the free cash makes sense to me, to put into a fund for a rainy day, or, you know, so it can be used for future needs. What are the alternative options that you guys looked at for use of free cash? Because this makes the most sense. It's better than going out and just getting new tires for all the town-owned cars. Because I'm sure there are tons of things that we could do. But was there another option that you considered?
We certainly looked at capital, and what's tricky about capital is because a lot of the capital expenditures that we look at are expensive, and they're things that we can borrow for. And, you know, tax-exempt bonds that the town can issue are competitive on the market, so our rates are usually pretty good, and that you know, shares the burden among multiple years of people who live in town and pay for or funding and benefiting from these investments. So, you know, to go, you know, make our capital budget a $3 million capital budget paid with free cash, I just don't know that that's necessarily the most important thing to do. I think in years like this, you know, set it aside, plan to use it in future years, but invest in general stabilization and find other places to invest in. I don't know what else that was our two, I think the main conversations went to stabilization, supporting the budget in future years, and then capital ed. We didn't really touch on much beyond that. And in terms of like those bigger capital projects like the Cunningham renovation, like that's a permanent improvement to that building that, you know, generations of students will benefit from. We can borrow that for 30 years, and 30 years of students will benefit from it. So we felt that that's, you know, we should borrow that rather than pay with cash up front. So those are some of the factors that go into the decision making.
Okay, makes sense, thanks.
Jay?
I sort of want to follow off that. And also what I was talking about earlier about setting policies. I almost feel like we're turning a page, we're starting fresh here. And when I look at the budget projection that Ms. Dexter provided, I see sort of no short-term capital in the future, but also no assumed in the future, and also no free cash assumed in the future. So what that makes me think is, hopefully there will be free cash, and we can use that to go to short-term capital expenses. So where I'm going with this is, and you might have heard me say this over the past couple of years, could we, the warrant committee, we, the select board, we, both of us, somebody set up a written policy to say, when we have free cash, we shall spend approximately 1 million on short-term capital non-bonded, and the rest of it goes into budget stabilization, or something else, or anything else, as long as it's a written policy that we all agree on. I've said this before, and the warrant committee's busy, and the warrant committee doesn't know if it's our job, and the select board is busy, and the select board says, well, it's our job, but then they haven't done it. I'm sort of rambling. I apologize. This is nothing new in this room, but it'd be great to set up a policy like that. Make your job easier too.
I agree. We have a draft policy that we just have not brought over the finish line.
Okay.
And I think one of the benefits to that is, we should have it in place. We don't yet. It's kind of something we've been working on. And then this, again, kind of turning the page here and knowing, okay, here's what we have to work with in the near, short-term 4 to 5 year cycle. Let's structure a policy to reflect that and make sure we're taking things into account. And to get back to the conversations with the ratings agencies, S&P in particular, it's a recurring question is, what is your reserves policy? And our answer is, we adhere to best practices where we don't have formulated a written policy. So it's something that we need to close the loop on, and hopefully we can get there.
Is now the time to ask about the non-override budget? If the override fails, what the budget is? Is this the correct time to ask about that?
I don't know, Nick, do you have beyond what we have?
I don't have much more to add in terms of from last night. I'm happy to respond to some questions. The select board has not yet signed off on the proposed non-override budget for the town departments, but otherwise I can speak to pieces of it if.
And I know you spoke to it a little bit last week, but my memory is short. I guess, yeah, do you want to just go, or should I ask specific questions?
I should ask and then we'll go from
I guess, I'm wondering, my specific questions are sort of, is it, one, will the cuts start with open positions? Maybe that's a no-brainer, but I was looking at a couple of large departments, saw some open positions. I think everybody would rather have the cut be a person who doesn't exist than a person who does exist. And also, just in general, is it going to be spread across all the departments?
So
Or-
we have a working list that I'm waiting on select board sign off, and hopefully we can do that next week and I can share it with folks from there. So yes, where possible, we are identifying where vacant positions are.
Okay.
And trying to be careful and thoughtful about how to identify and reduce services. That being said, if one department has more open positions than another, then they would be more detrimentally affected for them to be able to carry out their operations. So balancing that need as well. I think some of the things that will, one of the things that's going to be on that list is we do have $80,000 for traffic engineering that the Department of Public Works has been utilizing over the past couple of years to enable them to carry out projects, respond to citizen complaints. Like, that is on the list. That's just, it's not a person. It's $80,000. That is really nice to spend, but it's not gonna make it past the non-override budget. So that's places where we're looking and are working to finalize that and working with department heads and with the select board.
What role does the select board play? I'm sorry.
I submit the budget to them, and then they sign off on it from there. And ultimately, they're policy makers.
Okay.
So I've made my recommendations. We just haven't had a chance to go through them in more detail.
And those
publicly.
are private at this point?
No, not private. I want to be able to give them an opportunity to weigh back in, and if they say we don't love some of these things, go back to the drawing board. I have that opportunity without having relayed bad information or bad news prematurely.
Would that be an executive session that you discussed that with them?
No, it would be at our
Okay.
next meeting.
Okay. Can I ask a follow-up question about the traffic engineer?
Sure.
Yeah, Jay, you can, as long as it doesn't, if someone else raises a hand.
Yeah. that was something that months ago when we were thinking, oh, will there be extra needs funded and what can we get from this? And we were sort of discussing among ourselves, a traffic engineer, do they actually make traffic better? If so, that's a lifestyle, that's a lifestyle enhancement for the people of Milton. So the traffic engineer you're talking about, do they make traffic better?
I think.
I mean, I know nothing about this.
So where we use them is identifying locations where we can improve things for safety. You know, the traffic congestion.
Safety. I
as
want to
a-
move.
As a Milton alone is beyond, I think, our ability to dictate too much when the state, you know, pushes traffic, whether it's on 28 or 138 into Milton. So, because that's what they design those roads to do, is to push vehicles here. So that's where they're available, is to, as if we're going to dig up a road, what can we do to make this road a little bit safer? When we're doing so, what are the design features that we should be thinking about? When we're seeing, you know, speeding issues and those kinds of problems, how do we respond to those and implement interventions that make sense? So that's what they've been there and providing those kind of resources at, you know, Chase Berkeley's direction and now Marina Fernandez's direction. And I think ideally that would be a staff person who has that institutional knowledge, who gets to know Milton and knows the streets extremely well. Where we've been able to make it work is with engineering support from right now Beta Group, which is who we rely upon. So it's, I think in a perfect world, it'd be more money for staff. But for now, we make do on a kind of case-by-case basis with engineering, outside engineering support.
Thank you.
We have a town engineer budgeted in the department. We have an a civil engineer budgeted. The town engineer position is vacant, so I'll just use this opportunity to plug it. If anybody knows an engineer interested in working, and they could be a traffic engineer, that would work too. It's for our town engineer.
They're not on the list that you're going to cut next week, right?
The town engineer, no, that is, if we want to keep paving roads and repairing water mains, then that is a crucial position.
Liz, do you have a question?
No, I was going to talk about the traffic. It's fine.
So, Nick, I gotta ask a question. So the example would be like a traffic mitigation fund that you'd pull back, obviously, if there was any, right? Do you have any like more examples, maybe one or two more?
Of
Just things you might be pulling back on that you see, not to scare anybody, but do you have any other examples?
No, I mean, I
Anything else
think
you've identified?
it just kind of broadly, it's shared cuts across, you know, most town departments, you know, impacting vacant positions where we can have some. There are a couple of positions that are not vacant that are proposed to be affected, so yeah, it's, I mean, I think it's approximately like equal impact across multiple departments in terms of kind of numbers and percentages, but most are impacted in a way. We're planning to leave a position open that's under our budget, or unfunded rather. So it's those kinds of things that where the town planners and our select board budget, the intention is to continue to leave that position vacant, as we haven't been super successful on recruitment. So that's another place that would be affected, and that position would remain vacant if an override were to fail. So we wouldn't hire in that position. So that's just another example.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that explanation.
And I'm not trying to be.
Oh,
It's just I want to make sure that we have a chance to discuss it with the select board before that they're the first ones to discuss it publicly
we understand.
in a full kind of list.
Maybe you have any questions as to
Well,
Liz?
so with respect to the schools, that information was shared like in very detail, like publicly, specifically the positions that we were looking at. Will people be provided that sort of well in advance of town meeting? I mean, after this sort of discussion?
It would be public as once we go through it, we would
Okay.
do something similar to what
Okay,
they've done.
for all the other ones too. Okay, yeah, that's what I thought.
No, same level of transparency and, you know, if there's
Sure.
impacts to library, parks, our office, police, fire, DPW, cemetery, council on aging, across the whole gamut.
Right.
I don't know if I should wait till next week to talk about the schools, but
Depends on the question.
they've gone up expenses in 2 years, 20%. And is there a summary of like a 2-year, like the major increases, what that consists of?
I know they have it from 25 to 26 as part of, that's available
Yeah.
on their website. I don't know if, you could request it from them in terms of seeing that of a, 24 to 25, 25 to 26 kind of. Actually, I think it has each of those years. So we can,
But just the major ones, like it has the detail
it has the
on
detail, yeah.
PowerPoint.
You could reach
You
out
have to
to
go through
the
each
school administration, and request that kind of information. They would be the ones to present that.
And would you know if there's an Excel spreadsheet on the website, or is it just the PowerPoint?
I don't know what they've
There's
provided
no Excel At the
alternatively.
moment, they were
Oh,
had
okay.
a situation, and they lost all of
Okay.
their Excel, so they need to get them back.
So I should ask them, right? Do you know on the health, I know I brought this up last time, but like, that went up 20% in the last year, the expenses for health? And is there like any analysis as to what it was? Like, how many was to the number of people that went from single to family? Or how many people just were added? Or
We did prepare that.
something?
Amy
Some
did
summary?
go through.
Yeah, it's in the OneDrive.
And by department too, if possible.
We can't do it by department.
Yep.
It would take a lot of work for me to figure out that piece of it.
Okay.
But we do have a summary that shows how much of the increase is related to an increase in the enrollment, how much is related to the increase in the premium.
And then how much was related to how we set the fiscal 25 budget. So it's going up
Yeah.
because the 25 budget was artificially low. So it was artificially low because we used federal funds to offset it, which don't get appropriated. So-
COVID funds?
Yep. And then it was artificially low because we used a premium, one pay period premium holiday. So the appropriation was reduced by those two things. So the first thing we have to do is take that, is approximately $1 million. So that $1 million has to go back into the budget just to get us back to zero. And then we're adding because of enrollment and adding because of the premium increase.
Okay.
So it's those four factors that get us to that significant, I think it's 3.2 million and over, I think it's
Yes,
right around 20% increase, correct?
It's like, right, a third of the total.
Right.
Yeah, if I could see that.
Yeah, no, we talked about it, we prepared it, I can see it, I would have to dig it out at the moment.
Okay,
so-
that's fine.
And we can send it. We can send it, we'll send
Yeah,
it to you.
that'd be great.
Take a look.
Thank
And if you
you.
have questions, just reach out to us on
All
it.
right, thanks.
Judy has a question.
My question goes to the total amount of stormwater expense that the entire town pays for all its town property. And how I came to this question was when I interviewed a department head, they said that they had to pay their own stormwater. And then when I interviewed another department head, they said Consolidated Facilities paid their stormwater. So I don't recall seeing a total number of stormwater expenses paid. And is that, would I have to get that total number, do you have it? Or would I have to check out the Consolidated Facilities?
No, we can pull a report on that, but yes, just as with water and sewer enterprise funds, the municipal properties are also charged the stormwater fee. So when we say all users are paying into it, we mean not only residents and private property owners, but the municipal buildings are also assessed for their impact on stormwater, just as they're assessed for their usage of water and sewer. So we can get a report related to that. And in terms of how the town department how the town budgets is set up, some of the budgets that have facilities have their utilities budget within it. others are budgeted elsewhere. So where there's a single entity controlling a single piece of property, we try to budget those utilities there. But, so that's what makes it a little bit trickier on a budget by budget basis, but we can show get a report showing what town facilities were assessed for stormwater fees.
Okay, yeah, that just became a curious question for me, the totality of stormwater that the town is responsible to pay. Thank you.
No one online?
I do have another question, I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure, let's go.
Took this off so I can eat my snack. This $700 anticipated reduction to the school budget for the circuit breaker, can you kind of explain what specific aspect of the school budget that would be a decrease of? Like, do we know? It's just an overall?
So they have, when building their budget, they reduced their revenue forecast by $700,000 to say that we will rely less on circuit breaker to build our budget in fiscal '26. So we're identifying that as the reduction and then setting aside the $1 million in the sped stabilization fund as a result.
So it's not really a cut, like an additional cut to the budget, like,
That is my perspective.
Okay.
I think it's
Sure.
a good question for them to share
Okay.
how they
Thank you.
view it. But
Okay. Thank you.
because of the impact, that's where we didn't want to just say, we think that's a good place to reduce. We said we think it's a good place to reduce, and here's another way to set up funding to provide an avenue to recoup some of that.
Okay.
At least in '26, it's not, again, not recurring.
Yep.
And in exchange, the $700,000 becomes recurring for the town-wide budget.
that makes sense. Thank you.
Ron?
For the $9.5 billion amount, will the select board be doing advocacy publicly to try to get the town to understand the reasons why we came up with that amount? And
As a ballot question, we can't participate in political activity. Select board members, as individuals, I have to double check conflict of interest law, but for example, I cannot advocate one way or the other. I can provide information if asked. I can share information. I can participate in, forums about what the budget is and what one proposal would do versus another proposal, but you won't find me advocating on it.
so we'd leave it to the town to,
Outside
Folks to advocate if they
individuals
want
to do that, carry that.
Andrew?
So one of the things that came up in Monday's meeting was that schools were not doing budget to actual revenue analysis or expenditure analysis. Do you historically, do you know what kind of tools they use and what the school budget process is? I mean, is it centralized from school administration, or do the principals have control or over their individual budgets? What does the process look like?
I think those are good conversations to have with the school administration. I think what we can speak to is how we do it on the town side, and I don't know how many times I ask for year-to-date budget reports from Amy since I don't go into the software or haven't been set up to do so. So I think we can talk about what we do on our side to manage that, if you want to chat about that a bit.
So how to manage it?
How we manage our, year-to-date budgets, what are we watching out for, how often are we looking at them, and that kind of stuff, and what tools we use.
And that's a bigger question. What tools do you use? I mean, I think one of the things that came out in a previous conversation was that town is using SoftRate. Is that correct? And so when you're going through the budget process, does SoftRate, or is there a BI tool that gives you any sort of insight, or are you literally working from Excel sheets?
No, software, you can run various reports that compare budget to actual. I run those on a regular basis. For Nick, for any department head that may ask, but they also have access to the software, and a lot of them are trained to use it. So that they, we kind of rely on the individual department heads to monitor that, but I also review and approve every week the payroll warrant as well as the vendor warrant, and I go through invoices that are being paid. And the accounts payable administrative person in my office, it'll trigger and say if you're over budget or not, and we'll review those reports as we're going. And then for various departments, I'll do salary projections, and that's one thing the software, I know it has its limitations, especially on the school side because of how they pay their employees. It's more difficult to project out if you don't use Excel, whereas on the town side, we're pretty much getting paid the same amount every 2 weeks, so I can look at, it's 6 months into the year, I've spent 50,000, I'll spend 100,000 by the end of the year. It's more difficult on the school side because of A, the number of employees, but B, how they're paid. They get paid like for 180 days a year, and it's spread out over the school year kind of thing. So they get a lump sum payment in June. That makes it trickier, as well as sometimes they have different turnover. Like our people tend to come and stay for a long time, so there's not a lot of movement. So we'll know if a position's vacant. It's very easy to tell. So it's really relying on the software for those budget to actuals, and then doing some spreadsheets, but I don't, I do more to make it look the way I want to see it. But it's fine for what we need on the town side right now. Is it super spectacular like some private industry firms might have? No, but it's pretty basic stuff, but it gets the job done for what we need, at least on the town side.
And is there a payroll solution that you use, or is that
So
somebody?
that's part of it as well, but that's one thing that we've been looking into. We'd like to enhance that with more like an HR interface so that we could maybe reduce some redundancies in entering data and sharing information.
That was going to be
Yeah.
my next question. Has a town looked into an ERP solution?
So we've been looking more like focusing on the payroll, HR kind of solution. Like, so we've looked at like ADP, we've looked at the
Bamboo HR.
Bamboo HR.
There's another municipal provider, Tyler Technologies is the owner of that, so that's a pretty common one. So we've had conversations with different providers around a payroll HR solution to improve what we're doing. And it has the benefit of providing more information to employees than we're currently doing, because we're tracking some things manually in terms of accruals and sick time and time and attendance.
And it would have more of an interface for onboarding as opposed to that's paper intensive. Employee fills out a form and then we enter it. Whereas if we can get a solution that they go online and they put in their name, address, and fill out all their tax information and stuff, and that just feeds into our payroll system, it would make things more efficient and more accurate. So we're in the early stages of looking into that, but as far as a full-blown system, we were kind of focusing on that, and then we would look at upgrading our accounting software, which is basically the general ledger and accounts payable. That kind of fits in whatever solution we pick for that, because those things are kind of basic. We don't need anything fancy. And a system that for the schools could project their payroll out for them, which the current one has the ability to do, but when it was implemented back in 2016, 2017, it wasn't done. It wasn't set up to do it, so.
Pretty familiar with Bamboo, so have a chat offline. Okay, Ron.
One clarification. When I meant advocacy, I don't mean standing outside the polls waving
Sure.
signs. I mean education.
Yeah, no, we can as long as, yes, we can participate, share information, provide information that is accessible, that explains the budget, explains the process, explains what the impacts would be of different decisions.
Yeah, because I saw other towns, when they have overrides, a lot of times the town would have.
We'll share, share information, correct.
With all the math and all the justifications, why can we do this under law? All the,
Correct.
Okay.
I want to follow up on that. So, I mean, when you say participate in forums, I'm remembering back a year and a half ago or so, Tim Zerwinski was having monthly forums to explain MBTA communities to the people. We've got about 6 weeks. I'd love to see you do, sorry, I know you have kids and a wife, but you or someone do a number of those in the next 6 weeks. So that's the thought, is like a town employee, maybe a select board, maybe even warrant committee focused one. But also, would you be, I guess my question is, would you be able or willing to go to one that's sponsored by a vote yes on the override or vote no on the override group? If the vote no on the override group has a thing and invites you to come speak, or vote yes, would you be allowed to go there and speak?
I would have to take a look and find out. I'm not sure. In terms of if it's directly supported by a group.
That's what I'm imagining.
I
if
don't.
It is.
I can find out.
Don't know. Okay.
I don't know the exact direct answer on that. Generally, non-political, non-partisan is what can be done rather than on any side of an aisle.
Okay. And yeah, I'm imagining, and not necessarily volunteering you, maybe the chair of the select board or somebody, but like one in East Milton, one in the Keys Room of the library, one at Fuller Village. I don't know, but.
We are not override focused, but we're invited to do a finance 101 on budgeting forum with a group in April. So it's not going to be focused on the override, but it's more of a forum to educate the process we go through to.
What group invited you to do that?
Budget. Do you recall who that was?
Yeah, it was Connect Milton. They haven't, I think they're planning to announce that shortly. So,
Oh, should I have noticed that?
No. I referred to
Breaking news.
Breaking news here at the warrant committee.
Liz, when they're ready.
I didn't see any, so I'm sorry if I'm wrong, but were there public, I mean, I know we have the select board meetings where there's some public comment, but were there any like public forums that I just missed where the select board was able to hear from people about the different override numbers that they were considering besides citizen speak and whatever emails they may have received?
We did not do anything, no.
And are there gonna be any, I mean, other than just like education, but just like opportunities for people? People are always clamoring for that, so I'm just curious, like, are there gonna be any opportunities for not just like education, but just kind of feedback from the people and, all of our neighbors to say, I wish it were this number, where I'm concerned about specific things. It's sort of more of a public forum, other than citizens speak, I guess.
At this stage, I wouldn't expect that over other possible alternatives. I think, if anything, it would be, information about what the decision is and the impacts of that decision could be.
Judy, then Andrew.
Thank you. In regards to this forum that you anticipate participating in, have you, not you personally, but as a town employee, have you vetted that this group is totally impartial, or are they on one side of the vote or the other side of the vote? Did I make myself clear?
Yes.
In other
we-
words, do they align more with one way to vote than the other way to vote?
If we're we will review, any requests that we have to participate. If they're, aligned and formed as a committee on the support of an issue or in opposition to an issue, we would certainly avoid anything like that. But otherwise, opportunities to come and chat about the town budget might be boring to some, but we're happy to do it. So we won't really say no to an invitation. So I'm not going to really get much more into that in this case and in this environment. And I'm sorry, in this committee in terms of what we're going to do moving forward. But if invited, we'll be there.
Thank you.
I apologize. I've got a lot of different questions, and I'll just get to a few of them now. When you do forecasting, how many years out do you typically forecast other than long-term debt?
We roll a 5-year forecast for capital and operating.
Okay. And then one of the questions that came up in the last meeting that we had, and Jay put together some really great numbers, which sort of spurred this discussion, was within the context of the override. The question that I have personally is what sort of value do you derive from the additional override? And so Jay had done analysis of tax rates relative to housing prices, expenditures by comparable towns relative to there were numerous slides that Jay put together that
I've seen them yet.
and they're great. And that's not to say that that's how you get to the number, but it helps us understand whether or not we're in the right ballpark. And so when the select board came up with the number 9.5, or when they have discussions, how do they get to? Do they do that kind of analysis, or? What's the process? Like, how do they get to?
I think honestly, it's more black and white than that. That was what was needed.
Mm-hmm.
I think the question of was there appetite to go to the schools, for example, and say, hey, to balance the budget, it's a $9.5 million override, cut by $2 million, and we can talk. That isn't a conversation that happened. So, about whether to make it larger and to engage in that, there didn't seem to be the appetite for that either. So I think where the comfort level was with, in terms of asking the taxpayers for what is needed and not going too above that and not going too far below that, and then within kind of in that ballpark, finding a little bit of ways to make it sustainable in a different way than had been proposed. So I think that's valuable information, and it's information I shared with the board. After one of the presentations that Jay had done, I had asked him for it, and I shared it with the board to help them see some of that context. So, I think it's all helpful, but not to speak for all of them or individually any of them, but I think, ultimately the conversation started at, well, what do we need based on what the level of requests are?
Mm-hmm.
And let's start from there.
Because I'd love to see them do that type of analysis to sort of help tell the story of what are you getting for the additional. Like, for me, we need it is not the answer that I want to hear. It's more that, like, is it justified? Is it in the right ballpark? What are you deriving for the additional tax dollars that you're going to be spending, and is it worth it? Just to, as an average taxpayer, I'd want to make sure that you're getting some fair value out of that increase that you're paying.
Sure.
Thank you.
Oh, are you done? I'm sorry. You had more than one question.
Oh, yeah, you can. Some of the other questions really were around going back to the technology, do you have, like, how imminent is that investment, and have you planned for it? And then the other question is, when you have needs and it intersects with technology, who helps evaluate that? I mean, is it just your team, or is there does Rob Mallett and his team help, or do you use consultants? Like, what does that process look like?
Yeah, no, so I think it's usually, a combination of folks looking for solutions for what they have problems with, and then, coming back and speaking and reviewing with IT to make sure that it makes sense, it works within our infrastructure and our systems. Mostly things are cloud-based now anyway, so it's a little bit of an easier conversation on that end, but to make sure it meets the needs of the department, and Rob understands different software conversions. He's been through many. He knows, he's had experience in learning what things went well, what things didn't go well. So in terms of asking different questions than we might ask, that's what he's there for. I wish I could report that something was imminent on HR software. It's not free, so it's a challenge, and it's a challenge to carve out money for that within the budget. Those companies are typically on a per employee basis. So, it's not as expensive for just the town to roll it out, but it becomes a lot more expensive when the school is as well. And their needs may be different than what we're looking for. So that's why nothing is imminent there. We've had collaborative conversations, with the superintendent and the administration since the beginning on some of these, but it's stuff we were working towards. And part of his needs-based budget was a director of HR, and it's not something that's at the schools. So we had identified it as a group as something that we could benefit from. The town has an HR director, schools did not, and lead some of these efforts to modernize and change processes. So it's a work in progress. I'm hopeful that if a solution is the right one for us, and that we can come up with the money to invest in it. And the good thing is not a big implementation cost for a lot of these. It's more about that ongoing cost. So it's ironic.
Internal capacity to
Exactly.
take on that kind of
Right.
project.
So that's what we're working.
Thanks.
And it sounds like we should have a follow-up conversation offline and can talk about some thoughts and ways to try to get there.
Thank you.
Anything else, Liz?
Another thing that a lot of people have said to me that they're confused about is sort of the April 29th vote on the override and then the subsequent vote at town meeting in May. Is there going to be any education that the select board has planned for explaining this process to people? Sort of how this is sort of a two-phased process, and it's might be a little bit different than people are accustomed to with the override, because often it's gone the other way. But is there any kind of like education to people just explaining how that works with town meeting and sort of what happens in each of the scenarios that you and I had discussed the last time you were here, and we talked about on Monday too, like what happens if it passes one, and then, because people keep telling me they're confused about that, so it's just a thing I bring up.
No, that's helpful. It's good feedback. It's something we can work into whenever we're talking about it, just to explain what's happening and what the two distinct and separate actions are. So it's something we'll add to our conversations and whenever we're communicating about it. I don't think it had made it into our list of draft questions that we're working on rolling out, but we can.
Not understand it.
Yeah, nope, that's.
Okay.
Can I piggyback on that? I know you have several.
No, I don't.
I keep hearing people say, oh, the town is going to vote on the override, and then town meeting is going to vote on the override. And I pull what hair I have out and say, town meeting does not vote on the override.
Right.
If the town approves the override, those taxes are going to be collected. And we can come up with fanciful scenarios after that, but am I right? I mean, because I've been telling people that.
So yes, the town will vote on the override to allow then the town to raise its tax, everybody's taxes.
Yeah.
And then the town meeting gets to decide whether or not to spend that money.
Which is I mean,
It could
in
decline
theory,
to.
every year town meeting could decide whether or not to spend our money, but
Exactly,
that's
yes.
not really an issue. So okay, yeah, I think but
And how to spend.
how to spend it, sure. But I just, I think that's a point of confusion for a lot of people, is they think that town meeting is then going to have a vote, does the override happen or not? But that's not going to happen.
However, to piggyback off of your piggyback, if you will, I think that sometimes there's confusion of people too, like when I try to explain that point. The other thing is, if people think, okay, well, we have this vote, if town meeting weren't to then approve of that budget, then, right, we can raise the money, but it might not go where you think it's going to go. So I think it's very important to have kind of a outlaying of those different scenarios and to explain that to people as you're sort of educating, because people are very confused.
Just one nuance I'll just kind of clarify. So because the way the ballot question is structured as the select board approved it, if the town meeting does not appropriate the $700,000 into the operating budget stabilization fund, then that money can't be taxed. So that is tied to that specific purpose. The $8.8 million is subject to the town meeting appropriation process, just like the 700 grand is, but that $700,000 is, this town meeting basically has one choice on that. Do you want to put in the stabilization fund and tax or not? So that's that piece of it.
Can they not make a friendly amendment
To,
and say, I'd like to give it to Nick's technology budget?
for the $700,000 for the operating budget stabilization fund, it has to go into the stabilization fund or not.
Okay,
It's nice.
clarifying.
And then where it goes when town meeting appropriates it out, that is subject to town meeting's approval with a 2/3 vote. So that could go to health insurance or with a 2/3 vote of approval.
Jay?
To continue the back and forth with Liz, anytime you're explaining something to people, yes, town meeting can look at the override if it passes or fails. Let's say it passes. Town meeting can do whatever they want to with the budgets, but that's true every year. And we don't see town meeting ripping down budgets and rolling dice to see what the numbers are. That just, so when laying out the possibilities,
No, I'm not focused on that one.
okay.
Brian? Any more piggybacking?
So just so I'm
Yeah, sure.
100% clear on what I heard, that $8.8 million override, or at least that portion has been articulated for particular uses, but that does not necessarily guarantee that town meeting will appropriate the money for those same purposes outlined. There could potentially be a difference, unlikely, but possible. Is that?
Yeah, and to Jay's point, that's the case. Anytime a budget appropriation goes to town meeting, it's subject to town meeting approval. In a city, it's subject to the city council approval. The appropriating body makes a recommendation, and then the legislative body, in this case the town meeting, has a vote.
But that happens after the fact, though, right? After the override vote, or?
Yeah, so what the override allows is, the override allows town meeting to spend $8.8 million more in tax revenue than it would without it.
Okay.
So that's the difference.
Brian?
Different.
Sure.
Do you know how much Milton spends for the MBTA, to the MBTA?
The assessment, it's
For the,
2.2
what the
million.
assessment is?
Yeah, it's around 1 million.
It's 2.2.
2.2.
2.2, where is that, like, in the budget? How does it?
It shows up in, it's in the state assessment, so, in the budget, it wouldn't, so it doesn't get appropriated because it just takes it from their, the town meeting does not have to appropriate money, that's part of the assessment. So it's not like in the town meeting.
The state
warrant.
just doesn't give us that money. They charge us. Because they give us money for Chapter 70, right, for the school. Do you know how much they give us for that?
Right, just give me one moment, I just have it here. In the current budget year, it's 12.1 million.
Do we ever try to, the state assessment of 2.2 million for the trolleys, do we ever try to protest that, do you know? Do we ever try to, I know it's politically hot.
So it's a statutory assessment in chapter 161A. I think it's section 9. So there's a formula by which the MBTA communities, in this case, the MBTA communities, it's the same group of MBTA communities as in for the zoning law. There are certain brackets of groups and of communities that are assessed at different levels, and it's weighted and then weighted by population. So Boston pays the most, Cambridge and Somerville pay the second most, and then Milton is grouped with 14 other cities and towns that pay the third tranche.
Based on population, not on ridership?
I can't answer that because I don't know the answer to that, but my understanding is, so this was set up in 2000 when the state changed the funding of the MBTA. Yeah, so, but if you look at the group of communities that we're in with, it's Milton, but it's also Arlington and Belmont who they have different levels of service as Milton, so I don't think it's tied directly to level of service and ridership or anything. It's definitely not tied to ridership. I don't know what the rationale was, but there are, like I said, it's Boston, then it's Cambridge and Somerville, might be Cambridge, Somerville, Brookline, and then it's 14 cities and towns, of which one is Milton, and then there's 51 cities and town, which is the next tranche. So I was, through this, I had been trying to understand it a little bit better. There isn't a very good explainer onto it. Everything just points you back to the statute, which is, again, I think it's 161A, section 9, or I can find it.
See how good you remember it is. Check. Yeah, curious. Do they give us a discount if the trolley's not running if it snows, or is that, doesn't happen?
There is no said discount. Yes, so it's 161, sorry, chapter 161A, section 9 of Mass General Laws.
Impressed.
That identifies it. It was a friend of mine this week for something else, so. Pure luck that I had been looking at it.
I can confirm.
I'm sorry, it's Boston, then Brookline and Cambridge. I was slandering Somerville. They're in with us for whatever reason.
Anybody have any other questions for Nick and/or Amy? Okay.
The spreadsheets that are in the that you put in for the budget folder, have they changed in the last week because of the per department because of the override?
I just put a new one in there today, and I moved the old one to a folder called Old Version.
Yeah.
Okay.
The only change, it wasn't anything significant, but select board budget changed
By 9,000.
by
So
9.
everyone's budget is how wide, okay.
Well, yeah, some of them we haven't provided the detail for yet, like the health insurance, because it's not finalized. But those are the numbers we're carrying that are resulting in the 9.5 right now.
Okay.
So Amy, just to follow up, that's the most up-to-date
The one that's
product that you have
yeah.
right now, okay? Thank you very much for sending that to us.
And I didn't want to completely get rid of the other one, so if you're ever looking, if I put a new one in, I'll put a new date on it, and then I'll throw the old one in that
That's
older
helpful.
version file.
Okay. And if any member of the committee is having an issue with getting into that folder or have questions, you can reach out to me. We can facilitate. So,
And if you're having access to anything, just
okay.
reach out to Tom, but feel free to email me. We can, and if the shared folder's not working, we're happy to just send things as attachments as necessary. So
Thank you very much.
different comfort levels with the technology.
Are we editors of those files? Just viewers, right?
I think so.
Okay. Because I was worried when I opened them, I was like, oh, I don't want to.
No, so I have a folder for all of you, and then and you're all viewing, but I
Smart.
also have a folder with my original.
They might have, you might have editing privileges, actually.
But they're not my
They're
originals.
not
Yeah, watch that Warrant Committee budget go through the
Snacks,
They'll be
candy.
Oh, no, special town meeting, we'll go to Honolulu. Talk out there. But again, thank you for sending those. I think that, especially for the newer members of the committee, like seeing it on the paper as you break it down is extremely helpful.
A lot of tabs.
A lot of tabs. I love the tabs though. No? Okay, everyone, you sure? Like this is our best shot before. Yeah, we're gonna remember we're gonna have. Yeah, right. We're gonna have some various departments coming in. I know this is a lot, but maybe Nick will have you in one more time,
I am available.
just in case. But
There's a good meeting on Monday.
it's a great meeting on Monday.
Monday, yeah.
One child wasn't going to bed, but so
Meeting on Monday.
I could sense the faces when you were looking at the phone.
I bet you want to be here.
no, I'm just kidding. Well, who do I insult? My wife or all of you?
The Warrant Committee's used to it. Nick.
I do have a question. What, from the budgetary process standpoint, what are some of your biggest pain points?
I think it's more the political elements in terms of, we know what the budget can support year over year, but the demands in terms of what the asks and getting, like the override isn't a good example. Like some of the budget asks just weren't going to be realistic for this year without an override. And navigating through that and trying to get to a place where the elected boards could reach agreement. I don't know if we're necessarily there yet, but that's always the goal, to try to have this committee, select board, school committee, all in agreement in support of the ultimate budget. So I think from my perspective, it's more about continuing to try to work towards that as the trickiest part in terms of more kind of tactile financial pain points. For us, it's always health insurance and how that is going to shake out. It's so out of our control. It's so macro in terms of the things that are affecting it. And it's such a big part, as we saw with this year's budget, is how to land that in a place that, right now we're still budgeting a 14% premium increase. And that's a huge increase for anybody that's on the health insurance plan, like myself or any of the employees. So it's frustrating because it impacts the town budget so much, and then it's hard to know that's a significant impact on the employees as well.
What about from a process standpoint? There's no carrier pigeons or people carting papers from town to department to department, and are there?
No, I think we're in a place where we roll out the budget, September, October. So these templates that you have access to have been pretty locked in since then. So I think that from a process standpoint, in terms of retrieving the requests, talking through them with department heads, that's functional. I think the hard part is carrying it over the finish line through the work that you have to do, and then in terms of the big picture and settling on a number and getting to a compromise that everybody can be behind.
Got it. Thanks.
Did you say 14% you're budgeting on health?
Yes.
Where did you get that number from?
So we look at claims and trend data around health insurance claims, and the trend of the current year in terms of the impact on the health insurance trust. So right now, we had a significant jump in claims from about 13.6 million to north of 17 million that we're on track for this year. We're lucky that the trust, not lucky, we're fortunate that the trust has been in good financial condition. So we don't have to make up that whole delta, but we need to raise the payments into the trust.
It's to the fund, that's the issue, not the specific costs. We're self-insured,
Yeah.
right?
So if the trust were in worse financial shape, that premium increase would be even greater. But right now, at a 14% premium increase, we would keep things about level from where they are at the end of this year. So we'll close this year with a balance in the trust, and based on the forecast, we would be anticipated to close the trust with the same balance next year. And the recommendation from our insurance consultant has been, it could be bumpy for another year. You know, I wouldn't think a 14% increase and you'll be back to 3%. They're concerned that it could be another big jump next year as well. And we've shared information with Jay and others in terms of how what our experience has been year to date and what the forecasts are, so we can go through that if you'd like to.
I'd be curious.
Yeah,
I
no,
don't mind
if
if you have it.
Yeah,
Sure.
if you want to let me know when you're around, we can sit down and go through it. And really, as Amy alluded to, we haven't settled on a final number quite yet. We're waiting, hopefully, to get the February reports in, just to get another month's worth of data and an update on some of our higher claims and where those stand before we make a final call on that premium increase.
Anyone? Okay. Thank you very much. We really appreciate it, the both of you. Nick, thank you for the overview of the select board meeting. And we'll be in touch about other town departments. We have some set up, and
No, very good.
We'll
If you need
continue.
assistance and additional information or coordinating with department heads, let me know.
absolutely, 100%. Amy, thank you for providing the spreadsheet information, and it's great.
Can I owe you something?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good luck at home.
Everybody will be asleep by the time I get there, so.
Excellent timing.
See ya.
Okay, everybody. It's kind of the overview from Nick and just the discussions of the select board. I think what we have to look forward to. I'd ask that you take a look at the spreadsheets that Amy sent out if you haven't already. I think they're very informative, give you a good idea of where their money's going. You can see those increases in the general government departments versus schools, the amounts, the dollar amounts this year from last year. So I think it'd be a good tool, especially we'll have planning coming in. We're gonna have schools coming in next week, probably DPW, police, and fire. I'd like to get consolidated facilities in here also. So pretty active week next week. So, you know, as you've been all year, just be well armed so you can ask the appropriate questions. And I think in an idea too, you know, people watch these meetings, we comment. So any question is a good question for the public to hear the answer to. So that's it. Jay?
Okay. I know I'll pick on schools in particular because we had a lot of school questions on Monday and then a few tonight. You know, but for any department, I don't have the brain power or the time to do a deep dive into them. So I'm going to be looking very seriously to the school subcommittee or whatever subcommittee to be experts on that. So like, you know, some of the questions we heard on Monday, a couple of questions tonight. My view is, boy, I hope the school subcommittee is already on top of this. And if so, then great. Then I don't need to be. So I don't know if that was a question or a statement or a what exactly, but
Kind of a little of both. So, you know, I've been...
Challenge you to know everything about the schools, Lori.
Yeah, I've been harassing our subcommittee members, and I've been, you know, I think the general expectations. They've been feeding me, of course, information as they get it all year. It's very informative, and I think they'll have some good information for us. And as I indicated a couple of weeks ago, the school subcommittee is going to be focusing on the school comment. Okay, so it's obviously, you get 5 of you, and I've asked them, you know, they'll be the major contributors, along with us and our, you know, some of the information we have, but they'll be the major contributors and draftees of that comment. Just because, Jay, of that line by line expertise they have at all those morning meetings they go to, and I don't know how most of them manage them, but.
and I guess I think for myself, I'm not thinking I'm going to be asking you 100 questions. I'm thinking I don't need to ask those 100 questions at all because I'm sure you already have, and I can just do a couple high-level things. So I'm.
The school committee is coming in on Tuesday.
I know,
They'll make you
yeah.
100 questions.
But I don't want to. I don't know if that's an efficient use of everybody's time. because we're all about efficient use of time here. I don't know if that's efficient use of everybody's time if you've already dug into it.
Depends what you're asking.
So you know what, that all being,
Some of those questions answered.
yeah, if you have a great interest in this particular area, I think you'd email the subcommittee members. Think about asking about this. Do you already know? Should I waste my time? Do I not know what I'm talking about? And I do that, like, for example, Lori. I just call Lori. What's going on?
I guess I'm thinking, I wouldn't have to, like.
Oh, I understand, yeah.
Yeah, if schools, for example, were concerned about the financial process 2 years ago and 1 year ago, but if, and I'm not saying you do, but if the school subcommittee says, well, it's really cleaned up this year, I'll think, phew, one less thing for me to worry about. So just, I trust you I trust you is what I'm saying.
And I'll say that I think it's in progress,
Okay.
or in process. It's not complete. And Katie started on July 1st, and on July 16th, they went to the select board with a $3.8 million shortfall. And then it was, oh my gosh, what did I get into? Right? And then she had to start digging to try to understand. So I've probably been less pushy than typically because I know what she's dealing with and we're trying to get to the right answer. And I think I said Monday night, she's got the licensure to do the job. She's done it in many communities. Anytime I ask a question, she has the answers. So she knows what she's doing.
Yeah.
So I feel very comfortable with that. The job is not done. They still have work to do.
But when I hear you say that, I feel like, wow, 75% of my questions are, I don't even need to ask anymore.
Well, thanks, but I think you feel free if you have questions, if you have specific questions.
Peter?
I think it's more of what we talked about in terms of process, and do we trust the process? Do we trust that the numbers are there? Sure as heck, a couple of years back, you look at it, you go, what were you guys doing? And now there is a person who I think can pull that together. So yeah, I wouldn't spend too much time digging into what happened last year or the year before.
I'm very glad to hear that.
Thinking about, what are they going to do and what process are they going to use so that we can find out ahead of time what's coming. And Laurie has done a tremendous job.
And I think the other issue is to have the support. I think I described it related to each of the principals having a budget. And they didn't. Now, if they get a budget, who is the person that is accountable to make sure they follow it? They report to the superintendent. They don't report to the assistant superintendent of finance. So it's an accountability issue, and people need to be accountable. But she can't force them to be accountable. She can set up processes that they need to follow, and if they don't follow them, then we have a problem.
Yeah, Brian.
Just like, my question today, like, I believe everything you said, and I think she's competent and seems to be pulling it together. And she inherited it, and it's been an inherited problem. But there's still, am I wrong to state this, like, there still is like a 20% increase in 2 years in expenses? So is
Yes.
it worth, it's still worth to know what that was?
And I
it
think
might
I
be all
said-
legit, I'm sure it's all legitimate. But,
I don't know.
yeah.
What I've said is, I think that they need to go through, and Allison said it quite eloquently last week, or Monday night. They need to go through all the positions, especially like the non-teaching positions. What are they doing? They hired a number of positions with ARPA funds, ESSER funds, the one-time funds. And now they're here, and every year it was asked, what are you gonna do next year? Is the state aid gonna keep increasing to support the Fed funds that are going away? That didn't happen. So, have we really scrubbed the position? Have we looked at the job description? Have we identified efficiencies? And I said, they drive vendor warrants over. There's many people that are doing things that potentially could be more efficient. And I don't think that they have had the time to delve into, I mean, all those job descriptions to figure it out. And especially with trying to understand what the 25 shortfall was because of the 25 budget process that was used to create the 25 budget. So now the 25 budget is not correct. There is a deficiency there. They have to scrub that in order to do the 26 budget. So, I mean, she's working off of 3 different budget years. It's not a small task to do in a short amount of time. It's hard enough to do the budget when you know what you're doing, you've been doing it, and you know, it's hard enough to do the budget. But now she walked into a 3-year issue. So it's not there yet. But I do think they need to really scrub each and every position. And I don't think, I mean, they were struggling this morning with what to cut to close the gap for this year, without sacrificing anything they have. That's the issue. And it's not a full, like, review of positions. It's just like, is there a position there's a position that hasn't been hired. Someone left, there's a vacant position that can be on the list. That's easy. But to go through and say, well, is this position a position I really need? Well, that's hard. It's hard to do. They don't want to react too quickly. They don't want to, have the kids' experience be jeopardized. All understandable.
Were they, Lori, can I ask you, were they focusing on any one area? Were they focusing on administration versus teaching? I just keep hearing about teachers, not hearing about administration. So I'm wondering.
Well, and that is the non-teaching positions that Allison had brought up the other night, which again, I think, certainly does, we need to look at all of those. I feel like they're trying not to cut positions. They're cutting one open vacant position in order to close the gap.
And now that none others have been identified at this point?
Not to close the gap this year. They're looking at programming. They're looking at a program, I mentioned it the other night, the NEC program. It's a program for autistic children that they used to have contracted help in. They are realigning it and having existing staff do the teaching versus these contracted folks that were coming in. So that was a big number. But they're struggling with the next level of cuts.
Did they indicate this morning if at any time they would have that finalized?
Well, yes, so the plan was to have it finalized this morning, but it became a very painful process for them. And they did not, I had to leave the meeting to go to work before they wrapped up. I don't believe they closed the gap, and we'll meet Monday morning again, and then the select board is meeting Tuesday night. And it's a matter of, do they need free cash to close the gap, and we call it a day, and adjust the override, or are they going to come up with some ideas of fees? There's a concern about raising fees. A big concern by the school committee about raising fees.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
We used to pay for like kindergarten. Is that what you're talking about?
No,
Those
that's
are the
not
fees?
what they're talking about, but it's on my list.
Sports fees or activity fees or?
Activity fee, like any fee that isn't, just like a user fee. They're concerned about increasing any fees.
Is a fee submitting payments online? Because I remember that, if you're doing before care or after care, if you pay online, there was always a fee. Is that the type of fee?
No, it's
that
a
was
fee for
years ago.
community schools, the after-school program, the
Yeah,
summer programs.
That's right.
Fees for that. The bus fee, a late registration fee that if people don't register for the bus in a timely manner, they want to charge a late fee because it does really affect their process and it's very inefficient for them. They get all the bus schedules laid out and then they have 20 more kids 2 days before school starts that they have to try to accommodate. That's just a problem. But there is a consensus that they don't want to raise fees.
Does that also include lunch as well?
Lunch is free for everyone, subsidized by the federal government.
And what is your concern about raising the fee?
Because we just don't want to impose more fees on the parents. And I'm confused by that to some degree, because what we're talking about here with a $9.5 million override is a hefty real estate tax bill that the parents will be paying.
Dumb question, when did they start, when did the Fed start subsidizing lunch? Because I remember we had to pay for it.
COVID.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right, I forgot about COVID.
That's when I stopped making lunches at night to send in lunch boxes.
And they have not
Cash it.
taken it away
Okay, so they're stealing
for some reason.
Good, right?
And breakfast.
Which is nice.
Ron.
Yeah, I think it's a philosophical question. Should you charge fees? Because you could argue it's regressive, and lower income families bear a high burden, whereas affluent families maybe it's not as big of a concern. So I think they're probably, I would think that they're probably thinking about what is the impact on families if you start charging on everything, and that's probably something that.
Well, I think that's right, but I think when the kindergarten all-day K went into place, there was a fee associated with it, and then there was, if you don't make, if you make less than this amount of money, you'll pay this amount of money. So there would be a tiered fee schedule. I mean, I don't think that is, to accommodate it, but, I think, was it at this meeting, or was it the Monday morning meeting that Julia made the comment that, the pre-K program is the best deal in town? This is awesome, I'd pay more. So, the community schools, like the summer camp that they put on, basically is a tenth of what you pay anywhere else.
Did you mention sports, athletics?
There was, and that wasn't about fees, it was about eliminating sports, but I don't think that's really on the, I think that.
We're just
there was a
charging more
concern.
to do the sport.
There was a concern, there was a discussion about eliminating the sports program in the spring. But that was not well received, and then I don't think that was a big number to do that, so they would not be able to raise the sports fees to get the number that they were talking about in terms of cutting. If they cut, they'd save $150,000, so that's a big number. But it would be an adverse effect on the situation if they did that.
It's a big number, but not within the context of 52 million.
No, that's right, but they couldn't raise the fees to cover the 150.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily want to cut the sports programs for the spring.
A whole season.
The whole season.
Yeah, that's like crazy.
There's kids that
No.
want to play in
That's right.
college, and
That's right.
tennis is, soccer, those are.
That's kind of weird.
Well,
lot.
but that's like, they're not they're not going to do that, I don't think.
No, but that sort of logic is kind of
Baseball and
ass
softball.
backwards.
Yeah.
Like,
Tennis, my
Well,
daughter.
that
the
tells me how
context of-
desperate they are. They're not throwing that out for fun. They're throwing that out because
no, but let's try and cover this shortfall entirely by fees, and that's not really.
Well, they're not trying to cover it by fees, but, when they talk about increasing fees, the fees aren't high enough to really make a difference.
Unless you charge each kid $1,000.
I think it was
Crazy.
$35. My daughter graduated 4 years ago, but I just remember the fee was very minimal.
Yeah.
And,
Very
and she
minimal.
played sports all year. And so I'm imagining that the cost from the buses, right? The transporting the kids
Buses
to.
huge.
Yeah.
Buses are huge.
Field fees. and
Yeah,
everything.
that's
what we
huge. That's a big, and I know that, I'm gonna do a shout out to the women's hockey team. They're playing in the States.
Oh, yes,
In the
the
garden.
10-year-olds
Yeah,
won, the
the high
12-year-olds
school,
won,
the high school
the high
team.
school wins.
So, but then again, there was bus, but that's so worthwhile for morale and just for
Agreed,
development.
they all
I can't imagine women's sports.
And this is where it became like, okay, what else can we do? And again, we did not talk about the non-teaching positions. That seems to be,
I spend like $900 a year probably in athletic fees for the high school, and that's track.
Right, that's
in
right.
cross-country, like,
You get a discount for a second child.
Right.
So you always have, you have two children in a program. I mean, this is
Right.
all from 4 years ago, remember? You get a discount for a second child, but the sports are so important, so important.
Agree.
So just to your point about trusting the process. I mean, we can speculate on this all night because we all kind of have opinions, we all have kids and whatnot. But I think there's a school committee. Sounds like they're meeting,
Right.
and we have representation. I would just leave it at that. And
I
Wait to
think,
hear.
I think, yeah, I don't think we have much choice, but I think the issues that we're bringing up should be a focus for the next budget, so that we're not sitting here next year having the same issues that we had. I think there needs to be some accountability. For example, who would be in charge of going through all of the positions? And, one person whose job is to go through and make sure that everybody's efficient on the administrative side, somebody else on the teacher's side, and any other, just doing an analysis of it. Have we ever had an audit? An audit is not really the answer, though, because all that's going to do is say, yeah, they wrote a check for this, and it showed up here, and this is the way it is. It's more, what's the real priority? What do we really want to focus on? What do we want to make sure happens? And what might we be able to get away without doing?
Yeah, I think ultimately that's the school committee. They're
Yeah,
elected.
and the superintendent.
They're elected, and they're the ones who oversee that detail.
yeah, Liz.
We do have an audit every year, and we have an audit committee. that
True.
reviews the
Yeah.
audit.
Yeah.
That's also funded by the moderate.
Yeah.
So we do have audits.
That's another thing, that yes, they are audited every year.
They do
And I'm sure they're as dedicated as all the people who work for the town of Milton and do a good job. I think the issue really is that if, a zebra's a horse designed by committee. I mean, if the committee is making, accommodations back and forth on all the things that somebody wants and somebody doesn't want, then you kind of wind up in a situation where if nobody's in charge, then everybody's in charge. And I think
I think the school committee's in charge. I mean,
yeah, no, I'm not saying that they're not, they are, and I'm sure they are, but what I guess I'm saying is there needs to be a real sense of urgency around getting a budget that's right for the kids and for the town and the taxpayers.
when I listen to these, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, when I listen to these school committee meetings and they're talking about budget, all I hear is a sense of urgency. Maybe, I'm not trying to cause a conflict here. I'm just
No
a difference of
conflict.
opinion.
No conflict. I'm using more of my experience in the corporate world where you would not have a situation like we've had here.
That's right.
3 years in a row.
That's right. That is
Somebody's
the
in
issue.
charge, somebody's making
That's right.
things happen. There's a board, you always have a board. There are people who are gonna basically ask questions and then take action.
There's oversight.
And I think we're missing, right, there's oversight. I think we're missing on the take action piece.
There is an audit done, and it's always done, it looks like it's done pretty much by the same accounting firm that does the books. And the last one that's out there is from 2023, I think. But what I think people are asking for, and if you flip through it, it says, oh, everything's going great. And I'm not sure,
Yes, that we were
mostly,
at a
not everything, but
Yeah, they find issues.
So I think people are-
Internally, Brian?
what?
Conducted internally?
No,
Okay,
outside
external.
accountants.
Yes.
And then there's an audit
But-
committee that reviews that audit.
Yeah.
What
Like an
generally
audit that's
happens-
reviewed by the committee that then reviews the audit, so it's.
So they obviously, something seems like it was missed. So a lot of people have been calling for a third-party audit, because a lot of times accountants get familiar with the company, familiar with the process, and they might miss things.
But isn't that,
A
isn't it,
third-party audit might be helpful, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Brad. Their job is to make sure that, there's balance in all the books. It's not what was the amount that should have been in the books, or that was allocated. No, they're playing to the allocations and the checks and they're not basically deciding how much money should be in each bucket.
I think you're right that what people are asking for is different than an audit. But if people are saying we need an audit, well, we have an audit.
Yeah.
And people are saying, oh, I didn't mean an audit, I meant something different.
Yeah.
Okay, well, what was that something different you're asking for? That's,
It goes back to sort of a mission statement. We really what are we really looking to do? What are we focusing on? What are we willing to pay for? And what is less important. Otherwise, it just keeps.
And it
growing
needs
every
to be
year.
with a limited amount of money. I
Right,
think that's the
exactly.
issue, is
To that amount
there
of money, to
hasn't
that
been.
pool of money, as opposed to, we just ask for more money next year.
Yes.
And
Philos-
we're
and
not
that's a
alone in this. There's every
philosophical
school
change.
in every town goes through it, but.
So
Brookline-
managing your allowance.
Brookline's going through an audit now, I think. Brockton had a big audit. I mean, and I don't think it's the annual audit. I think they had an annual audit as well, because that's a requirement to do that.
But I think the problem is not that there isn't a paper trail on what's being spent, which
Right.
would come up in an audit. It's more of a resource planning. Is there a cohesive enterprise resource planning process? And so when I ask questions like it was surprising that Nick didn't have access to the GL system, for example. And Amy said different departments have access to theirs. I'd be interested to see how much they're actually using that. And so when you don't have people actively looking at their budgets and how they're performing against it, or if you're not measuring things, then you really only find out there's a problem once a year.
That's right.
And so that's why I would love to see them invest more into getting more insight. And even if you spend a lot today, it'd save dividends downstream.
Correct.
Okay. Everyone okay?
We're good.
Are we ready for next week?
No?
Get ready.
So
What's going to happen?
So we've got Tuesday, we've got Monday, Tuesday.
We have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, maybe Thursday.
Wow.
Fun times.
We're gonna
I'd like to
zoom
keep it
in
to
from
3.
Erie Pub and.
We do it this setup, we can do that.
That's Thursday.
That's Thursday, excuse me. We are going to have Thursday. The question is the Wednesday meeting, the 19th.
Wednesday is the
Wednesday's the question. Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, maybe on Wednesday. We have like 3 weeks. Everyone, we have a very limited, I'm going to go through what the warrant's going to look like, maybe talk about some volunteers for some of the comments. And I'll have that for Monday. So I have nothing more to say. If anyone else has nothing more to say,
I'll make a
Motion.
motion?
Second.
Second. All in favor? Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you, Warrant Committee. Thank you, Milton.